What's good? It's Woog. Good morning, happy 4th of July, and wow. So Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns, the UFC 251 main event for the 170-pound welterweight title, has just been canceled, according to reports, as Gilbert Burns and his team tested positive for COVID-19. I'm not terribly surprised by anything when it comes to COVID, but now I hope that Gilbert and his team, including his brother, can get well soon. This has to be extremely disappointing and scary for them. Things were just going unbelievably well for the UFC compared to most of the sports world. They've far and away been the most productive during the pandemic, against a ton of initial criticism, and deserved criticism. And after eventually postponing that Tony Ferguson versus Khabib turned Ferguson versus Gaethje showdown, they made the arrangements necessary to put that event and several others on. And suddenly, in back-to-back days, we're hit with the news of Khabib Nurmagomedov's legendary father, Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, passing away after a long up-and-down fight with COVID. And now, just a day later, the title contender for UFC 251's main event has to pull out after testing positive. Guys, this is a really disturbing time that the world is going through. And the UFC finally getting hit hard by this thing like much of the rest of the world has was only a matter of time. It's really been a luxury that we've been able to have the amount of escapism through the UFC that we've had up until this point. And we'll probably continue. We don't know how out of hand COVID's going to get. We know that it's now deeply impacting 251. We'll see how widespread that becomes. Hopefully it's not too bad and some of these events can continue. So now this main event is in jeopardy, and in guessing what happens next, I'm looking at a couple of things. The UFC would like to salvage this fight, I'm sure. Don't get me wrong, this 251 card is pretty great, even if you subtract this main event. But the UFC would much rather have a case like they did when Jones was removed from his scheduled UFC 200 fight versus Daniel Cormier, and then Anderson Silva stepped in on only a couple days' notice on that Brock Lesnar-Mark Hunt undercard. Than they would when Robert Whittaker fell very ill just before defending his title against Kelvin Gastelum and had to cancel the main event entirely and then elevate Adesanya versus Anderson Silva from co-main to the main event. They don't want a scenario like that. Even though, as I mentioned, Volkanovski versus Max, followed by Aldo versus Yan, followed by Rose versus Andrade. Come on, it's a good card. But also, last-minute replacements in championship fights are one of the unexpected thrills of combat sports. In 2003, longtime undisputed boxing heavyweight champ Lennox Lewis was scheduled to defend his belts against Kirk Johnson to be aired on regular TV. Johnson had to pull out, and the last-minute replacement was largely unknown but fast up-and-comer Vitaly effing Klitschko. Ouch. That fight was an instant classic and would be Lennox Lewis's last fight. So here's a question. Is the UFC willing to pay more than they'd wanted to pay for a quality challenger? This was supposed to be Jorge Masvidal's fight, but he and the UFC were nowhere near an agreement on what he should be paid, especially once the pandemic kicked in. Ariel Helwani just tweeted that Masvidal's manager, Abraham Kawa, said that Masvidal's absolutely willing to take this fight on short notice. I interpret the unspoken subtext of that tweet to really mean if the UFC agrees to pay him what he thinks he's worth. I don't think that the circumstances will force the UFC's hand to the point where they pay way above than they plan on paying. I think they'll pay a little more, but not anything that would satisfy Jorge. I think that he'll have to change his mind in order for this fight to be made. Colby Covington just posted a pretty funny and exciting post on Instagram of he and Kamaru staring each other down before the 245 showdown for Usman's title. Funny caption too, something to the effect of, you know who the UFC is going to call, Marty, and it ain't the Ghostbusters, Jr. Yeah, that would be pretty amazing news, and a very dangerous fight for the champ, as he already knows from their outstanding dogfight back in December. Now, Colby's had a pretty tumultuous relationship with the UFC in recent years, and I honestly think they've really played him a couple of times. When he was supposed to get a big fight, I believe it was a title fight against Woodley. Yeah, I think it was Woodley. And Colby was just coming off of the either Damian Maia or RDA win, both 5-round fights. And the UFC wanted him to fight for the title on super short notice. We're talking cutting his recovery time like in half. But Colby insisted that he be given adequate time to recover. Naturally, right? And the UFC said to him, sorry, and moved along, giving either Kamaru Usman or Darren Till the title shot instead. I thought that was unfair to Colby, who had fought hard in that 5-rounder. And it's not always the fights that look like they should take the toll and require a lot of recovery that in fact do. Colby, like all fighters, deserve time to heal, especially after a 5-rounder. Well, I'm sure that many would love to see a rematch between Usman and Colby. Maybe not as much as they want to see Jorge Masvidal get back into the cage, but damn, who'd complain about that potential rematch? So I support Colby in trying to call his shot here. Will the UFC pay him what he wants? Probably not. Will he be willing to take less? If so, how much less? The UFC plays hardball business-wise, but their time here is limited, so they either need to figure it out or cancel the whole fight and elevate the Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway title bout from co-main to main, and then Petr Yan versus Jose Aldo for the vacant title at 135 up to co-main. Another question, can Colby Covington or Jorge Masvidal make the 170-pound weight limit on short notice? If so, fantastic. I have my doubts, seriously. And if they can make 170, can they do it in a healthy manner? I don't think that they've been mirroring the efforts that fighters normally undergo to cut weight before a big fight. I don't. But I could be wrong. And if not, would the UFC entertain a catch weight? I know that they don't like to do that. It also wouldn't really be fair to the champ, who's been training to make that 170-pound weight. And if they can't come to an agreement with Colby, who else is available to step in for Gilbert Burns on short notice? Again, I'm assuming that the UFC will not work anything out with Jorge Masvidal or Conor McGregor. And I don't really think Conor McGregor wants that fight now anyway. There's Leon Edwards, the number 4 contender, who's up in the UK and hasn't fought largely due to travel restrictions related to COVID. Remember, Tyron Woodley versus Leon Edwards had to be canceled around the time that the quarantine started. Are Edwards' logistics now any more manageable? Does this fight taking place at Yas Island off of Abu Dhabi make the logistics and travel arrangements any more manageable? And can Edwards, like any other fighter I'm about to mention, make 170 on short notice? Then you continue to look down the rankings. Woodley at number 5, who just lost and needs to recover. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I don't think he's currently scheduled to fight, but one, if he's not scheduled, I doubt that he's been prepping to make a 170-pound weight limit, let alone prepping to take a fight in a few days, whether you're on weight or not. Are you in condition to fight a 5-rounder? I don't think they'd make the title fight a 3-rounder. And also, Wonderboy would be so much different of an opponent, stylistically, that if I'm Usman, I don't know if I take that fight. Not that Usman can't beat Wonderboy, but I'm saying that if you've been prepping for one fighter, you take a strong left, and all of a sudden you're fighting this elusive kickboxer when you thought you would be fighting Gilbert Burns. And if I'm Usman's new trainer, super trainer, Trevor Whitman, I wouldn't advise switching to Thompson on short notice. But let me know how you think this plays out. There's a lot going on. The fight's about a week away. Enjoy your 4th of July weekend. Everybody be safe out there. I ain't got to tell you. But please, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.